The fire crackled beneath the grill, smoke curling into the Texas dusk like incense over a battlefield. Boots scuffed the dirt as cowboys formed a silent half-circle, arms crossed, rifles slung loosely over sunburnt shoulders. In the middle of them, barefoot on the dry earth, stood a girl no older than 16, hair tied back with twine, hands trembling, holding a slab of raw meat. The iron grates hissed as fat hit fire, and a smell began to rise, rich, sweet, alien. One cowboy muttered, "Let her grill it." The others said nothing. Not yet. She wasn't supposed to touch fire, or knives, or meat. She wasn't supposed to speak. Yet now the enemy was cooking dinner. For them. How did it come to this? Hours earlier, she'd still been a prisoner in rags, her body barely holding weight. Now she commanded fire. And what happened that night would not only feed the ranch, but rip open everything the war had taught them to believe. The grill pit sat in the far corner of the yard like a forgotten relic, half sunk into the dry Texas dirt. Its cast-iron legs were mottled with rust the color of dried blood, and one side of the grate sagged inward, warped from years of branding iron and weather. Flakes of black ash still clung to its underbelly. No one had scraped it clean. No one needed to. It wasn't meant for food. It was meant for tools, for searing marks onto cattle and steel. The cowboys called it the pit, not the grill. Cooking wasn't its purpose. And maybe that's why it had been left untouched, because fire, when used for food, was an act of peace. And this ranch hadn't known peace for a long while. A gust of hot wind carried the faint smell of grease from the nearby mess hall, mixing with the iron tang that clung to the pit. It wasn't a kitchen aroma. It was mechanical, bitter, like scorched metal. Dust gathered in the grooves of the grill, and beneath it charred fragments of bone or fat clung stubbornly to the edges, cemented by years of use and neglect. A few flies circled lazily above, too bored to commit. A sun-bleached horseshoe lay beside the base, half buried, its edges pitted. It was quiet here, always quiet. That morning, the prisoners were marched past it. 8 women, 2 of them barely more than girls. Their uniforms hung from them like sacks, too large, too heavy. Sleeves that once belonged to soldiers now drooped off narrow shoulders. Their boots scraped against gravel, but one girl wore none. She walked barefoot, her soles dusted in red clay, toes curled slightly each time they struck a rock. They moved in a single line, heads down, arms slack, flanked by 2 cowboys with rifles that hung more from habit than threat. Kiyomi was third in the line. Her braid, short and uneven, stuck to the back of her neck with sweat. She didn't look up when they crossed the corral or when they passed the water troughs. But as the group veered left, approaching the side yard, her gaze broke from the dirt. The wind shifted. Smoke from the pit, a ghost of old fire, caught her nose. And then her eyes locked on the grill. She didn't slow much, just a half step. But it was enough. Enough to catch the attention of the cowboy on her left. He squinted beneath his hat, watching her without moving his head. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. She only stared, just long enough for something unreadable to flicker behind her face. Then she looked down again, and the moment passed. But the cowboy didn't forget. He knew that look. He'd seen it in men who returned from war, when a smell or sound dragged them backward into memories they didn't ask for. Kiyomi's glance at the grill hadn't been idle. It had weight. The way her shoulders stiffened slightly, how her fingers twitched and then went still, how her lips parted just a fraction. It all said more than words ever could. They continued toward the barn, the boots of the cowboy behind them beat a slow rhythm against the packed earth. A screen door slammed somewhere in the distance. Chickens clucked irritably in their coop. The sound of a harmonica, thin, wandering, floated through the air, then faded. The pit remained behind them, a dark mouth yawning in the dirt. No one gave it orders, no one cleaned it. But that morning it had been noticed, for the first time in months, not by a ranch hand, not by a cook, but by a barefoot girl who hadn't spoken since the ship crossed the ocean. A girl who, somehow, smelled something in that rusted iron that no one else had. A girl whose hands once knew fire. And the grill, silent and waiting, remembered too. Steam lifted off the metal basin like breath from a beast. It swirled in lazy spirals before vanishing into the wooden rafters above. Kiyomi stood ankle-deep in the mud behind the barn, sleeves rolled to her elbows, wrists thin as wire. The water in the basin wasn't warm, it was hot, almost boiling, the kind that stung when touched, the kind that made skin go pink before the pain even hit. But when she plunged both hands into it, there was no flinch, no hesitation. Only the hiss of soaked cloth meeting water. The fabric, stiff with dirt and sweat, softened under her grip. Soap floated in milky half-moons across the surface, the bar itself chipped and graying at the corners. She picked it up, fingers moving with mechanical familiarity, turning the rectangle in her palm until it sat just right. Then she pressed it into the fabric and dragged it hard, slow, across the grain, as if slicing through something unseen. Her hands worked with rhythm, pinch, fold, scrub, rinse, until the cloth surrendered its filth into the basin. The other prisoners worked nearby but farther off. A few sat on upturned crates, wringing out trousers and socks. One woman used her elbow to wipe her forehead, then winced as suds stung her eyes. A young girl, 16, maybe younger, paused to watch Kiyomi. She saw the way her hands moved, not frantic or clumsy like the rest, but measured, controlled. Kiyomi didn't scrub with desperation. She processed. She managed the cloth like a task she had done 1,000 times, because she had. A gust of dry wind swept past, pulling steam sideways and ruffling the girl's damp collar. The sun was high now, throwing shadows under the tub and making the water shimmer like oil. As Kiyomi pulled out another cloth, once a shirt, now just a rag, the edge caught her finger. The soap slipped. It hit the wood with a dull clack, and as she bent to retrieve it, her hand froze mid-air. For a second, she wasn't on the ranch anymore. She was in Nagoya, in a tiled hallway, long and echoing, the walls slick with humidity and the floor mottled with brown stains no scrubbing could remove. The metal trays beside her steamed under a spigot, surgical instruments rattling inside. She reached for a scalpel, its edge still pink. The nurse barked something, "Rinse faster!" and Kiyomi obeyed, dropping the knife into a vat of disinfectant so strong it peeled skin. Her fingertips blistered then, too. And still she didn't flinch. Back behind the barn, she blinked once. The soap was still on the ground. She picked it up slowly. Its edge had chipped where it hit the wood. She turned it over in her palm and resumed scrubbing. Another shirt, another movement, the sound of fabric sloshing through water. Her blisters from Nagoya had long since scarred over, leaving raised ridges that now gleamed in the light. They pulled slightly when she bent her fingers. The girl watching from the crate narrowed her eyes, noticing them for the first time. Kiyomi rinsed the cloth, then slapped it against the side of the tub. Water sprayed up, catching her chin. She wiped it with her shoulder and reached for the next piece. A pair of socks this time, American issue, wool, coarse. She turned them inside out and began again. Steam rose. The soap's scent was faint but sharp, like lye and ash. It curled into her nose and did not leave. Her hands were soaked now, fingertips wrinkled, knuckles red and raw. The fabric she cleaned was no longer cloth. Not to her. It was memory. It was routine. It was something her body had learned before it was old enough to understand why. She didn't think about the laundry. She didn't need to. Her hands moved because they remembered. One of the cowboys passed by the fence line, chewing a stalk of something. He slowed, watching the girls for a second, eyes trailing lazily over the group. When they reached Kiyomi, they stopped. He watched her wring out the sock, fold it in half, and place it with the others in a wooden crate, stacked neatly like sterile gauze. He said nothing. But he watched a little longer than he had the others, and the grill pit behind the barn, still cold and silent, waited. That night it didn't wait. It lit. It began with a dull clang of the iron grate, then the spit of kindling catching dry. A soft crackle followed, the sound of flame breathing for the first time in months. The sun had just fallen behind the mesquite trees, staining the horizon with a bruised orange, and the yard took on that strange, flickering duality, half shadow, half fire. A cowboy in a frayed canvas vest stood at the pit alone, boots planted, one hand scratching the back of his neck while the other nursed a long-handled fork. His hat was tilted low, his jaw working slowly over a plug of tobacco. Beside him, a slab of pork fat, fatback, sizzled as he dropped it on the grill. It hit iron with a shh and flared with an orange burst. He didn't flinch. Just turned it once, let the skin blister and split. Grease ran down into the coals. Smoke lifted. Inside the barn, Kiyomi was mid-step, halfway toward the feed room, when the smell hit her. She stopped so fast, the wooden floor creaked under her heel. Her body locked. She blinked once, hard, and then the scent, heavy, unmistakable, rolled in like fog. Smoke, salt, sizzling meat. Not like stew from a tin, not like broth. This was primal. Grease and fire, a smell that filled your mouth before you could taste it. The smoke slipped between the slats of the barn walls, thin fingers dragging memory behind them. Kiyomi's hands hung at her sides, unmoving. The floor under her bare feet felt suddenly warmer, as if heat had seeped into the boards. A faint shimmer danced on the barn wall, firelight, trembling. She turned her head slowly, like something ancient was calling from the dark. She wasn't on the ranch anymore. She was 8, kneeling in a muddy alley behind her family's shattered home in Nagoya. The walls around them were blackened from incendiary bombs. Bricks crumbled like brittle teeth. Her mother crouched beside a squat charcoal grill made from an old metal bucket. She was barefoot, skirt tied above her knees, in her hands, sweet potatoes, burnt on the outside, steaming on the inside. One had cracked, leaking syrup onto the coals. The smoke then was the same as now, sweet, stinging, thick. Kiyomi remembered how it stuck to her hair for days, how it lingered in her nose as she slept. Back in the barn, her eyes stayed fixed on the beam of light stretching from the pit to the open stall door. The fire outside popped, sharp, like a knuckle cracking. Another plume of smoke curled inward, dark at first, then fading into gray. The cowboy outside flipped the fatback again, dragging the tines of the fork through the flesh like a lazy artist etching on canvas. Kiyomi took one step closer to the barn wall, where the scent was strongest. She touched the wood, palm flat, feeling the thrum of sound through the planks. She didn't cry. Her throat was tight, yes, but her eyes stayed dry. Instead, her breathing slowed. Her nostrils flared once, twice, and then her shoulders dropped, just barely, as if something locked deep inside her ribs had shifted. Behind her, a chicken stirred in its crate. Dust floated through the amber light like ash. The grill crackled again, louder this time, and with it the scent deepened. The fat hissed louder. A pop of juice snapped into the coals. For the first time since arriving, the grill had become more than metal. It was alive. The rusted legs trembled from the fire's energy, and the sagging grate glowed faintly beneath the pork. A second cowboy walked over, hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything, just stood watching. The first man flipped the meat one last time and nodded. Inside, Kiyomi took one slow breath, then backed into the shadows. Her face was unreadable. But her steps were deliberate now, silent, slow, and drawn out like someone moving across sacred ground. She returned to her cot, but did not sit. She stood by the wooden post and stared through a knot in the wall. Smoke continued to pour into the sky, and the pit, now lit, didn't remember her. It called her. The next morning the call changed shape. It clanged. In the mess hall, a metal cleaver slipped from a cowboy's grip and hit the wooden table with a sound sharp enough to cut the air itself. Every head in the room flinched except one. The knife spun once, landed blade first, and rocked gently, edge buried into the grain, handle pointing upward. Kiyomi didn't pause. She stepped forward, bent low, and reached out. She gripped the handle with her right hand, not like someone retrieving a dropped tool, but like someone remembering the weight of something familiar. Her fingers wrapped around it with quiet certainty, thumb placed instinctively near the bolster. She didn't inspect it, didn't weigh it in curiosity. She simply lifted it free from the table, careful not to scrape the blade, and set it down flat, aligned with the wood grain. Silence stretched. A younger cowboy, maybe 20, eyes still pink from the morning sun, leaned forward slightly. His spoon stopped midway to his mouth. Another older one, wiry and chewing with his mouth open, raised an eyebrow. No one spoke, but the sound of her movement, bare feet whispering across the planked floor, the whisper of cotton against canvas, was louder than the breakfast chatter. A metal tray scraped across the table behind her. Someone had spilled dry oats. No one noticed. Kiyomi stepped back into line with the other girls. Her hands dropped to her sides. The moment passed. But not for everyone. That afternoon, in the prep tent near the kitchen, the younger cowboy, the one with the pink eyes, watched her again. The sun baked the canvas from above, turning the entire space into a humid oven. A basket of vegetables sat in the corner, turnips, yellow onions, carrots still wearing their roots. He dragged a crate over and gestured with his chin. She looked at him. Then the vegetables, then the knife. It was the same cleaver. It had been placed deliberately, spine up, beside the crate, clean, the wooden handle still damp from washing. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. It wasn't a request. It was permission. Kiyomi stepped forward. Her sleeves were rolled again, the same way they had been when she scrubbed cloth. Her braid had come loose in the heat. She picked up an onion first, firm, dry skin like parchment, and sliced off the root end. Her hand didn't tremble. She cut the bulb in half, skin curling away, and then her fingers moved. Thumb tucked, knuckles forward. The blade hit the board in a staccato rhythm. Thuck, 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 thuck. Even. Measured. The cowboy blinked. She moved fast, not wasteful. Each slice was uniform. Each cut deliberate. He leaned on the doorway, arms folded. She moved on to the carrots, scraped the dirt with the back of the blade, halved them lengthwise, and diced them in angles that matched. There was no trial, no doubt, only repetition. The cowboy sniffed once. Huh. She reached for another vegetable. Her fingertips were stained orange from the carrots, but she didn't stop. The scent of chopped onion bit into the air, sharp and bright. Sweat rolled down the back of her neck. She wiped it with her shoulder, never pausing the cuts. From behind the tent, the faint sound of a banjo filtered through the dust. A cow bellowed. Chickens clucked somewhere near the barn. But inside this sun-bleached tent, it was the rhythm of the knife that held. He stepped closer. She didn't look up. She took a potato, small, red-skinned, and quartered it in one motion. Then diced, then cleared the board with the spine of the knife. Every movement spoke of use, not just familiarity. This wasn't a girl mimicking a task. It was a technician, quiet and precise. The cowboy swallowed, rubbed his thumb over his belt buckle, and turned to leave. But at the flap, he paused. "Where'd you learn that?" he muttered to himself. She didn't answer. She just set the blade down, edge facing away, aligned with the grain. And behind the barn, the fire pit sat cool, but not cold, waiting, again. The next thing placed in her hands wasn't a knife. It was a mistake, a burlap sack, half full with flour, soft and lumpy like powdered earth. Someone, maybe a cook, maybe a cowboy, had left it near the feed crates. Alongside it, a dented tin pitcher of water and a cracked ceramic bowl. No note, no instructions, just left there like a challenge dressed as an oversight. Kiyomi stood in the back corner of the barn, between the hay bales and the wall, where light pooled through slats in narrow beams. She crouched low, knees bent, back straight. Dust clung to her shins. The flour smelled faintly sweet, with a sharp undercurrent of old grain. Her fingers dipped into it slowly, trailing the fine powder before she poured a portion into the bowl, careful not to spill a grain. The water came next, cool, not cold. She added it in a thin stream, stirring with her hand until the mixture turned to paste. Then she began to knead. Her palms moved deliberately, pressing, folding, turning. The dough was rough at first, sticky in the cracks of her knuckles, clinging like wet clay. She dusted more flour onto the board, a wooden plank meant for feeding chickens, and kept going. Her breath fell in quiet, measured exhales, in time with the motion. No one saw her start. The barn was mostly empty. Chickens rustled quietly in the next stall. A beam groaned overhead. But the air soon filled with the rhythm of movement, skin against dough, palm to wood, fold and push, fold and push. Her sleeves inched down with sweat, and she shoved them back with a flour-streaked forearm. The dough softened, elasticity forming. She tore it into equal-sized pieces, patted them flat, and shaped them into thin rounds. She laid them carefully on the rim of the old stove, still warm from the morning's kindling, and placed a bent metal pan atop it like a lid. For a long time there was nothing but heat and silence. Then the smell began. It crept outward from the corner of the barn like a secret told too loudly. Not like stew, not like bacon. This was different, subtle, comforting. The earthy scent of toasted grain mixed with wood smoke and dust. It smelled like warmth made solid, like something human. A cowboy passing through the yard slowed, then stopped. He sniffed once, twice. His boots shifted. He said nothing. Kiyomi flipped the first round. The bottom had browned in patches, the edge blistered, curling upward like a drying leaf. She pressed it flat with a piece of cloth, careful not to burn her fingertips. Another hiss, another wisp of heat. By the time the fourth one finished, a second cowboy stood near the barn door. He didn't cross the threshold, just leaned on the frame, arms folded, watching through narrowed eyes. He had a tin cup in his hand, but didn't drink. His gaze followed her every move. She plated the bread on a scrap of clean cloth, the rounds stacked gently, steam curling off them in soft tendrils. No one told her to stop. No one told her to continue. The rules weren't written here, only noticed when broken. The first cowboy approached, still silent. He reached out, palm open. She offered him a piece. He tore it, held it to his nose, then bit. The chew was slow, deliberate. He didn't react right away, just nodded once, then left. He didn't throw it away. By morning, the sack of flour had been refilled. A newer bowl, uncracked, sat beside it. No words, no orders, but from across the yard someone had stoked the grill pit. The ashes were cold, the grate still leaned crooked. But there was a bundle of fresh kindling sitting beside it now, and someone had laid a clean piece of cloth across the metal crate nearby. A prep station, or an offering. The bread had spoken, and the pit was listening. It listened again the following afternoon, though the words it heard came not from flour, but flesh. The ranch cook was drunk. Everyone knew it. His voice echoed off the corrugated walls of the supply shed in a slurry drawl, and the half-empty bottle of corn liquor sat brazen on the mess table like an extra guest. The delivery truck hadn't come, and the usual cuts of meat, flank, shoulder, ribs, were nowhere in sight. What did arrive, late and sweating through brown paper, were scraps, unfamiliar, blood-slick, thick with sinew and fat. "Sort it," a cowboy barked, tossing the bundles onto a splintered table just outside the barn. The paper peeled open on impact, revealing pale, marbled flesh, veined with purple, connective tissue clinging in strands like old thread. It reeked faintly of iron, the air thick with that sweet metallic sting that followed blood left too long in heat. The women hesitated. None stepped forward. Then Kiyomi moved. She didn't wait. She didn't speak. She just stepped to the table, wiped her hands on her apron, and laid a palm flat against the topmost cut. The beef was cool despite the sun, the fat firm beneath her fingertips. Her other hand hovered above the pile, fingers flexing slightly in calculation. A breeze tugged at her sleeve. She pushed it back. Someone handed her a knife, a boning blade, thin and curved at the tip, its handle smooth from years of use. She didn't thank them. She didn't have to. She began. Her first incision was along the grain, not across. She sliced with the heel of the blade, not the tip, drawing the steel back in a slow, even pull. A flap of membrane peeled free. She paused only to rotate the meat, her hands steady, her breathing quiet. The other women watched, still as statues. She flipped the cut. The cowboy from before, the one with the pink-ringed eyes, leaned on a fence post nearby, arms crossed, a toothpick shifting from one side of his mouth to the other. His brow creased as he watched her remove a tendon in one clean motion, separating fat from muscle without tearing either. "Hell," he muttered under his breath. "She's done this before." Kiyomi adjusted the blade in her grip and reached for another cut. This one had bone, shank, or joint, hard to tell, but she tilted it instinctively, resting it against the edge of the table, and found the seam with her fingers before the knife touched down. The blade slid in, kissed cartilage, and eased the joint apart with a soft pop. The cowboy's toothpick stopped moving. The rhythm was unmistakable now. Slice, turn, scrape, fold. Her apron darkened with smears of crimson. The table pooled with juice. She wiped the blade clean on her thigh between each cut. Not carelessly, just deliberately. One of the older ranch hands stepped out from the shade, eyeing the pile. He watched her stack trimmed cuts. Neat, square, no waste. "That ain't guessing," he said aloud. "That's training." Someone chuckled. "You, sure she's not ours?" The first cowboy shook his head. No, she's theirs. Or was. Kiyomi reached for the last piece, a thick slab with uneven edges. She placed her palm over it again, eyes scanning the grain like she was reading a page. She didn't hesitate. The knife moved faster now, still precise but with fluency. By the time she laid the final cut down, the pile looked less like scraps and more like something ready to eat. Then came the pause. No one told her to cook, but no one reached for the meat either. The silence crackled like distant thunder. Finally, one cowboy, newer, younger, tilted his head toward the pit. Let's see if she can cook. No laughter, no sarcasm, just quiet curiosity. All eyes turned toward the grill. The kindling laid earlier was still stacked. The grate still leaned, but someone had wiped it clean. A match waited on the nearby crate, its red tip glinting in the sunlight. And for the first time, the words weren't just muttered. They were an invitation. "Let her grill it," the younger cowboy said again, this time louder. No one objected. The air held still as if waiting to see who would break first. The matchbox sat on the edge of the crate, its cardboard spine peeled halfway, one corner wet from dew. Kiyomi stepped forward without being told. Her apron was already stained, streaked with crimson and onion peel, the cloth damp from hours of work. She didn't ask for help. She didn't speak. She just picked up the match. The first strike didn't catch. The second did. A thin line of fire bloomed with a hiss, sulphur sharp in the windless air. She leaned forward, tucked the flame under the dry pine twigs, and waited. Smoke slithered out first, then flickers of orange. The kindling snapped once, then again, like old bones cracking in rhythm. Heat licked upward in slow curls. Kiyomi fed it small scraps of bark, dry weeds, splinters peeled from the edges of the barn. The grill pit groaned, metal expanding. It had not been used for food in months, maybe longer. The rust along the grate had darkened in stripes where oil once scorched it. The legs stood uneven in the dirt, one shorter than the others, so the surface tilted slightly to the left. But it held. The fire took root beneath it, and soon the coals glowed red like embers beneath the belly of a forge. Kiyomi stepped back, brushing the ash off her palms onto her apron. A bucket waited nearby, half filled with the cuts she'd cleaned and portioned. The meat was marinated, barely. Just salt, a touch of pepper, vinegar drawn from the mess hall. She had found an old brush made of horsehair and coated the slices with a thin layer of fat rendered from the scraps. The first piece hit the grill with a sound like applause. Shh! The cowboys began to gather, boots scuffing dry earth, arms crossed, chewing silently. 10 at first, then 15. Soon over 20, ranch hands and guards alike, drifting in from barns, stables, and fences, drawn by the smell. The meat browned instantly, fat bubbling along the edges, smoke rising fast and dense. Kiyomi stood at the edge of the pit, eyes half closed against the sting. She blinked once, but didn't step back. Instead, she leaned forward, flipped the meat using a long-handled fork, then tapped it against the grate to shake off charred bits. The second piece went down, then the third. Her hands moved without urgency, but without waste. No fumbles, no hesitation. Each cut placed like punctuation in a language only her body remembered how to write. The smoke thickened. It curled around her shoulders, caught in her braid, soaked into her apron. Her cheeks flushed with heat, not shame. Sweat beaded at her temples and dripped onto the ground. She wiped her brow on her forearm, then reached for another cut. One cowboy, older, heavy-set, leaned toward the first. "That's the best I've seen it done all month," he muttered. The other didn't respond. He was watching her. Behind them, more arrived. 30, 40. By dusk, nearly the entire ranch circled the pit in silence. No one offered to help, no one interrupted. Kiyomi kept working. The meat hissed and crackled. Each piece came off the grill darkened at the edges, striped in sear lines, juices still bubbling. She laid them on a wooden board lined with burlap. When one board filled, a second was brought, then a third, and still she didn't speak. The only sound was the fire and the breathing of 50 men who, for the first time, let the enemy feed them. No one said thank you, but no one said stop. And the fire kept burning. The light had shifted. Evening now. Long shadows stretched across the dust-packed yard, and the pit glowed in the blue dusk like a wound that refused to close. The air was thick, not just heavy, but loaded, with scent, with silence, with something else no one wanted to name. Salt hit first, dry in the back of the throat, then fat, greasy, sweet, and almost sticky where it clung to the lips. Smoke followed, soft and bitter, curling like a ribbon around the nostrils. And beneath all of it, pepper, coarse and biting, barely there but just enough to sting if you breathed too deep. Kiyomi stood a step back from the grill now. The flame had died to glowing coals, the hiss of meat now reduced to a quiet sizzle, more breath than voice. Her hands were red again. The heat had done its work. Blisters raised on the pads of her thumbs and fingers, raw and white under a sheen of oil and soot. She didn't flinch. She hadn't all day. The last cut of meat rested on a wooden board beside her. She didn't touch it, just stood with her arms at her sides, shoulders dusted with ash, eyes fixed on the men she had just fed. They were eating. No chatter, no banter, no second helpings yelled across the yard. Just chewing. Some sat cross-legged in the dirt, boards of meat between them like sacred offerings. Others leaned against the barn, one boot propped against the wall, gnawing slowly, like each bite was something they had to earn. The food was good, better than it should have been given the tools and ingredients. But no one said that aloud. The smell clung to everything. The boards, the aprons, the ropes of hair that fell from beneath the girls' kerchiefs. One of the prisoners, a girl no older than 12, sat with her back against the trough, a piece of charred meat in her lap. She hadn't eaten yet. She just stared at it, eyes wide and unmoving. Another girl took a bite, and that's when it happened. The sob burst out of her before she could stop it. Mouth full, jaw still working, she dropped her bread and cupped both hands over her face. A muffled cry, sharp and wet, echoed off the barn wall. No one moved. No one comforted her. The sound wasn't strange, not here, not after what they'd seen, but the timing was. During food, during eating, it had broken through. The cowboy nearest her didn't look away. He didn't speak either. He just stared at his own hand, the one holding the meat. Then, quietly, he lowered it. From somewhere near the fire, a voice spoke, low and tired. "This tastes like something we shouldn't deserve." No one laughed, not even a chuckle. Someone cleared their throat. Another shifted in the dirt, their boot grinding grit under heel. One man pressed his thumb into the center of his palm, hard, like trying to remember something, or forget it. Kiyomi saw all of it. She didn't eat. She hadn't taken a single bite all day. Her stomach had stopped asking long ago. The smoke coated her tongue anyway, and the salt hung on her lips, and the smell of it all filled her mouth like a phantom meal. The coals in the grill glowed low, orange through the iron grate. The metal had turned black in places, patches where fat had hit too hard and burned. The crate used for prep now held nothing but bone. Even the cloth that once held the bread had been taken, torn, or eaten. blisters raised like pearls across her knuckles, white at the center, red at the rim. One cracked when she flexed. She didn't wince. She wiped the moisture on her apron and stepped away from the heat, the soles of her shoes sticking slightly with each step. Around her, 50 men chewed in silence. They weren't just eating food, they were swallowing memory, guilt, something they couldn't put down. And still, no one spoke to her, not directly. But they didn't stop eating. And she didn't stop watching. The night passed without another word. The last ember died quietly just after midnight, no wind to fan it, no reason to stay alive. The air settled into silence. Even the crickets waited. By dawn, the grill pit stood cold again, but not abandoned. Gray light crept over the hills first, spilling like ash across the yard. The ranch's dust looked paler in the morning chill, dew clinging to the tips of boot prints and shovel heads. The smoke was gone, replaced with that faint wetness that smells like rust waking up. Somewhere far off, a horse nickered, but the barn remained still. Kiyomi stepped out from the bunkhouse. No guards accompanied her, no girls either. Just her shadow stretched long and thin in front of her like a question. Her shoes pressed into the still soft dirt, and with every step she left behind a trail. Light, even, deliberate. The grill had been scrubbed, not just scraped, scrubbed. The grate gleamed in strips, silver cutting through the black soot where someone had taken a wire brush and gone to war with the residue. Ash had been shoveled out, heaped in a tidy mound a few feet off. Even the bent leg of the frame had been propped with a small wedge of stone, flattened on one side like it had been chipped just for that purpose. Beside the pit, on the overturned crate where she'd placed the marinade, something waited. A cloth. Folded, gray, heavy, rough like flour sack linen, but clean. On top of it, a chef's knife. The blade wasn't new, but it had been sharpened to a fine edge, razor thin, with a slight curve that whispered through the air just by being lifted. Its handle bore small dents, dark from years of grip. But the weight was even, balanced, familiar. Kiyomi reached out and unwrapped the blade from the cloth, fingertips moving slowly, not cautious, but reverent. Her thumb brushed the spine of the knife. Smooth, cool. She turned it once, then twice, and then let the handle rest fully in her palm. It fit, perfectly. No note, no tag, no guard watching from the fence line. Whoever had left it didn't need to be seen, didn't want to be. She crouched beside the crate and laid the blade back down in her lap, the cloth still spread beneath it like an altar. The grill stood cold beside her, but the smell of what had been cooked the night before still lingered, embedded in the iron. A mix of char and fat, of pepper that clung to the back of the nose. She ran her hand along the edge of the crate and found a notch in the wood, one she hadn't noticed before. Deep, clean, a practice stroke. Someone had tested the knife before leaving it. She sat with it, not for long, just enough. The rising sun cut through the smokehouse slats and drew long fingers of light across the dirt. The sound of footsteps started to echo again. Men heading for stables, for the field, for duties unchanged. But none approached the pit. They didn't need to. The fire was out. But the memory of it hadn't cooled. And now the grill, once rusted and forgotten, no longer belonged to the ranch. Not really. It belonged to her, because this time what they left her wasn't just acknowledgement, it was permission, and she didn't have to ask any more. The orders came folded in a man's hand, no fanfare, just a list, names, dates, a line of trucks scheduled for Thursday. The sky was overcast that morning, pale and chalky, as if the clouds had forgotten how to rain. The dust didn't rise like it used to. It clung low, heavy in the cool air, sticking to boots and skin like flour. Kiyomi stood by the barn with a burlap sack slung over one shoulder. The knot of the rope handle dug into her collarbone, but she didn't shift it. Inside were 2 shirts, 1 cracked bar of soap, and a tin comb with teeth bent in the middle. She had nothing else, nothing she needed. The knife was not in the bag. She had wrapped it, again, in the gray cloth, folded it carefully, and placed it back where it had been left, on the crate beside the grill. No one saw her do it, or if they did, no one stopped her. Smoke still clung to her clothes. Not thick, not like the night of the meat, but subtle. A thread of it wove through the stitching, hidden in the fibers, impossible to wash out. When she raised her arm to adjust her braid, the scent lifted. Fat, ash, charred pepper. The memory lived there now, permanent. Boots scuffed behind her as others gathered. No words were exchanged. The truck's engine turned once, then twice, before roaring to life. Its growl shook the dust from the trough rails. Kiyomi climbed into the back without help. The plank bed of the truck was slick with old oil and warped from sun, but she knelt beside the sideboard and looked east, toward the yard. The grill was still there. From the truck bed it looked small, almost unimportant, but it was cleaner than it had ever been. The pit had been cleared, ash scooped daily. A new grate had been added, heavier with tighter bars. The legs stood even now, bolted into place with metal sleeves, and beside it the crate remained, stained, scarred, but standing. One cowboy walked by it just then. He didn't glance at it, didn't pause, but the toe of his boot tapped the edge of the crate as he passed. A gesture, not an accident. The truck pulled forward with a lurch. Kiyomi's hand gripped the sideboard, her knuckles turned pale. The wind pushed her hair back, and the scent of dust and diesel swallowed the smoke. But it was still there, inside the folds of her sleeve, beneath her collar, ghosting from her skin like something burned into her. Behind them, the ranch faded to the color of bone, but the grill held its place, not just as a tool, not any more. It had been transformed by fire, by memory, by silence. No longer just steel and ash, it was proof of something unspoken, of the way things had shifted, even if no one would ever say so out loud. She had fed them, once, with hands blistered and steady, and they had eaten, all of them. The truck climbed the hill, the ranch shrank. But the smoke stayed on her clothes. If this story stayed with you, if the smoke lingered in your chest, please like the video and tell us where in the world you're watching from. These stories matter.